So welcome to our last panel of Microsoft 365 May, Tough Conversations, Change and Leadership During a Crisis. My name is Rebecca Jackson and I'm one of the co-organisers of Microsoft 365 May. And before I hand off to our host for this panel, I just want to share a few important messages with you. So first of all, thank you to our traditional owners. We welcome our speakers and participants from all around the world, but in particular, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this online conference is hosted, and the traditional custodians of the lands where our Australian-based speakers and participants are located. We'd also like to pay respects to elders past, present and future. I myself am coming to you from the land of the Wurundjeri people. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko Rebecca Jackson tōku ingoa no Melbourne aho. On behalf of Microsoft 365 May, I would like to welcome and acknowledge all our speakers and participants from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you for supporting this hui. Importantly for this session, we also have a code of conduct for the conference, and why it's more important for this session is because you have the opportunity to ask questions and vocally ask questions of our speakers. So we ask in general that you be constructive, be respectful, be helpful and be kind. If you'd like to reference our code of conduct, the full detail of it is available on our website for you to reference. And definitely thank you to our sponsors. So throughout this event, we've been supported by sponsors who have allowed us to hand out wonderful prizes and to fund all the back-end activities in terms of our website and things like that. So we're very, very thankful for the support that we've received from our sponsors. But past the formalities, it's my absolutely great pleasure to hand over now to Megan Strant, who is the host of Tough Conversations, Change and Leadership During a Crisis. Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, Bex, and thanks for all the intros. And thanks everyone for joining. So today we're hoping to provide for you, I guess, some really interesting conversation. This panel was put together probably with the people in mind before we actually sort of confirmed the topic. What we wanted to do was, think about some of the things that have been going on right now during the crisis. And, there are a couple of people that we brought into the panel, particularly because we thought their perspectives combined would make for a really interesting discussion. So with that, I wanted to now introduce our panel. So today with us we have Ellie Whitton, from the Head of People and Culture at NextDC, Nathan Belling, Founder and General Manager of InSync Technology, Rebecca Hopkins, who's a leadership coach and specialises in the Dare to Lead Brené Brown coaching, and Fiona MacDonald, who's a diversity inclusion lead at ANZ. Thank you so much for all four of you for getting involved in the panel and for all the unique perspectives and approaches you'll bring to the discussion. So to get started, what I wanted to do was throw to Rebecca to begin with. Now, hopefully this is appearing, that looks great. Everyone's on the screen. Thank you everyone for keeping your videos off so we get that perspective of all the panelists on and visible for us. So Rebecca, to begin with, I thought it'd be great to get you to start off. Given your role in coaching in vulnerability and daring conversations, I thought it'd be good to get you to kick this off and talk about tough conversations and why that is such an important topic to address.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess where I'd like to start is talking about the elements that make a tough conversation tough versus just a regular conversation. So one of the first things that's usually present in a tough conversation is that there's a difference of opinion. So I think the most obvious example I've got there is performance review time. If you've ever been in a performance review where your manager has a different rating to what you think you're going to get, that's usually one of those tough conversations. The other thing is that tough conversations are when emotions are really strong. And look, one of the things I talk about here is that we have to be, as leaders, as colleagues, as partners and parents, we have to be emotionally literate. And what I mean by that is we have to be able to understand not only emotions in ourselves and be able to name them and manage them, but we actually have to be able to recognize emotions in the people that we're talking to. So you've got difference of opinions, strong emotions. And then the last piece is around the stakes being high. So in a tough conversation, usually the outcome can have a significant impact on the people's lives that are in the conversation. So if you think of, if you're negotiating a pay rise, that can have a significant impact on your life. If you are breaking up with someone, if you are firing someone, a lot of these where they're emotionally charged and difference of opinions and really where the stakes are high. Yeah, that's kind of how I'd frame tough conversations. And actually, interestingly, out of Brené's research, so Brené did a 7-year study on leadership, and she spoke to 150 leaders of C-level and above of Fortune 50 companies over about 7 years, and collected data on what made leaders courageous and what made courageous cultures. And the number one skill set that courageous leaders have, and this is number one by like a long shot, is the ability to have tough conversations.
Thank you. And so Nathan, I guess, firstly, as a business leader and a business owner and someone who's spent a lot of time building a business and working on the culture and all of that, what are some, I guess, with those things in mind, types of tough conversations that come into your role?
It could be anything from the tough conversation of who didn't unpack the dishwasher, right through to that performance review, or adjusting how tomorrow looks for someone. So, and that could be where they work, how much they work, or how much they're paid. So where you're actually reaching into someone's future, that's that's probably one of those ones that make it a little bit tougher.
And when I was thinking through, I guess, a bit about the four of you, what you had in common and what was different between you, one thing that struck a chord to me in particular was Fiona and Ellie. I may be wrong, but one thing I was thinking was, Fiona, what stood out to me in your role is that there's a big focus on supporting people and fairness and equality and what you try and drive. Whereas Ellie, when I thought about your role, I particularly thought of the stance of you probably being a leader through those tough times and managing the business message. So I guess with that comparison, Fiona, I wanted to understand a bit more for everyone about your types of tough conversations and how that might differ from a business owner in what you support through your role.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And so my background originally is as an employment lawyer. So in that world, the tough conversations were quite different, and it was a lot of performance discussions, investigating people who'd had allegations against them. And so moving into the diversity and inclusion space has been a lot more positive, but the conversations aren't any less tough. So one difficulty with the diversity and inclusion space is almost everything that's put to me is worthwhile. It's, a good cause that can have a positive impact. And so the really difficult conversations are often where you can't do everything. And, the things that we do or don't do have to make sense from what makes sense from a business perspective and a strategic perspective as well. So I think, the tough conversations are often saying no. And, to what you were saying about courageous leaders, a lot of people really struggle with saying no or struggle with doing something that's unpopular. So that's, I think, particularly difficult in the diversity space, and particularly if you're saying no to someone who's already in a potentially vulnerable or marginalised population.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And one of the things that I kind of talk about is making sure you've got your facts in place and not coming from a place of the stories you're making up about things. So I think, they're perfect examples, Fiona, where if you don't go in with facts and a reason and a purpose and an outcome in mind, it makes it really difficult.
Ellie, tell us a bit about the conversations that you find the toughest in your role and how the sort of topics you have to deal with.
Yeah, it's actually probably very similar to Fiona in a way, in that, being in HR, the toughest ones are always performance and potential job loss, whether it be redundancies or performance-based terminations, something where you really know that you are having an impact on not only someone's professional career, but also on their personal life. And definitely what we're seeing, particularly at the moment with the environment, is something in XDC we've not necessarily had to have those traditionally tough conversations around redundancies and cutting hours, but it's actually moving more to that mental wellbeing space for our leaders and supporting people to remain productive, but also to manage their work and their personal lives. And we're seeing that divide become less and less, I think, apparent. So a lot of our leaders, a lot of my role is in coaching them to be able to support people's mental wellbeing, which always hasn't been a skill leaders have been brought up or taught how to manage. So I definitely agree with what Rebecca was saying in terms of facts, you sort of, rather than shoot from the hip, you're better off and potentially giving advice that isn't sound, just taking your time and really listening to what they have to say, because sometimes I think being a leader is admitting you're not the expert and that you might need help or to source the information from somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Rebecca, tell us a bit about what you think in your role are the sort of aspects people need to consider before they dive directly in. If they know they're going into a meeting and it's going to be particularly tough, what do you think people need to consider?
Yeah, look, it's interesting because there's two types of tough conversations. There's those ones you're talking about where you can prepare for them, and then there's the ones that you like find yourself in that you weren't expecting. So the ones that you can prepare for, I think, look, besides the facts and having a clear purpose and an outcome in mind, I think get your intention right. Like if your intention is to go into a feedback discussion to make that person feel like they're wrong, then you're going to have, it's not going to go well. Like the one thing I talk about a lot is in the conversation, listen for what you agree on instead of listening for what you disagree on. And even just keeping that in mind as you're in a conversation can be really helpful, because often we're in these tough conversations and we just start defending ourselves and then we're just looking for what we disagree on with people. But if you can have this intention before you go in that I'm going to listen for what I agree on and we're going to look for a mutual purpose and a positive outcome, then that's kind of the pre-work. And then when you're in it, they're hard because often when we're in tough conversations, you know, your heart starts going. And for me, like my face gets hot. Like that's my first, like I'm very lucky I don't go red. Like I'm not a person who like shows my face being hot, but when I'm in a tough conversation, I can feel my face starts to burn. So I find the best advice I can give, and the advice I take for myself, is know your body. Know the signs that are telling you you're in a tough conversation, because then you can do something about it. Yeah.
And so just going back to some comments you made before, Ellie, you know, the current situation you're in and the change at the moment in your role, what are you sort of working on and telling yourself, do you think, or what are you doing differently when you're going into these tougher conversations right now?
Yeah, look, I think it's listening more than ever at the moment. I don't know, you should, like, listening is just such a skill, and we always talk about it, everyone goes, oh yes, communication, listening, I know they're important skills, but right now at the moment, not being able to have that face-to-face interaction, which some people do find having a tough conversation more difficult in person, others find it even a little bit easier because you can kind of play off body language. And I personally definitely think body language is something you can work with. So at the moment, and I've always prepared in terms of have your, you know, what is it, whether it's an issue, what's the impact to either themselves, the business, others around them, and then similar to what Rebecca is saying about the intention, if you're coming from a place of you've got a clear idea of the outcome you want to achieve rather than getting stuck on the potential issues you're faced with and how you can involve them in the solution, you're more likely to get a much better outcome than I think getting stuck on things that you can't change. And at the moment, particularly in this environment, a lot of people want answers to questions that we just don't have and the government doesn't have. And I think that's one of the toughest things at the moment is you want to be able to assure people that, you know, it's going to be okay and we're going to get through this, but you just don't, I don't think anyone has that sort of level of certainty at the moment. So it's a fine line between being very honest and open with your people, but also not alarming them at the same time by overwhelming them with information that could or could not be right.
Yeah.
In the current crisis, one thing I personally noticed internally within our organisation, but then the way we support other organisations, was this rapid need for communication and, you know, COVID briefings and facilitating. For us, it was facilitating the technology that was required. I guess also, particularly with you, Nathan, I noticed as an employee of yours, the not style of your leadership change, but probably the frequency of briefings. And it seemed like you had to immediately pivot and suddenly be a leader in a different way than you ever had to work through this crisis. What are some of the ways that you had to respond and change to handle the toughness of what's going on right now?
For me, it was really around that communication and the frequency of the communication, because while ever you weren't communicating, others were. So what I tried to do pretty rapidly was to control the narrative. So, so if I could control the narrative as to answer the questions I know I can answer and talk about the questions I know I can't answer, then that stopped, I guess, the virtual water cooler talks. So what we went from is the environment change as well. So I all of a sudden couldn't see into all of our offices because there was multiple of number of people because they're all working from home. So what they're taught, so the conversations they're having with their partners each night about uncertainty of the workplace or the uncertainty of their partner's workplace. So I just kept on bringing it back to the communication. So what would I want to know in this situation? And then I opened it up to the whole team and gave them the ability, gave them a platform to actually ask anonymous questions. And I actually put myself on video and answered them honestly. So, and every single one of them was answered.
And I guess it's quite a large contrast between you as that direct business owner to Fiona. I mean, you're playing a role in a very large organisation. How has your role been impacted in the crisis and with the messaging and how you've had to work?
It's been really interesting, very similar to what Nathan was just describing. So at ANZ, we're really lucky that we have a pretty amazing CEO who's an incredible communicator. And so from the very beginning, we had daily briefings. The bank also organised, even when we were still in the office, we were getting really regular briefings with the head of International SOS, who was the external kind of health provider to the bank. So we were hearing from doctors directly as well. And so as the crisis had progressed, but even from the very beginning, Shane Elliott, our CEO, in the daily briefings had a really clear plan. And so I think just having the clarity of the plan, the repetitive messaging of the plan gave people real comfort. And also he's really incredible at explaining complex concepts simply. So I think having a clear, simple plan, staying on that message, not sugarcoating things either, admitting that there's a lot that we don't know, as we were just talking about then. I think that just reassures people as well, because people know when you're lying to them. And so I think sort of false promises don't really work at a time like that. So I think that regular messaging, the clarity of the message, having a clear plan really reassured people. And the other thing that was quite interesting is from time to time, different leaders would run those calls and they got a lot of feedback that everyone wanted to hear from Shane. So it was a really good example that it wasn't, because they were just trying to sort of share the load, I think, but they got the feedback that everyone really wanted to hear from Shane. And so he's continued to run those messages. We then sort of moved to 3 times a week, and then now we're at 2 times a week. But even if that's not a long message, but the other thing he's been really great at doing is we now get external people in. So we've had, big customers of the bank come in and share their perspective. Some of the charitable organisations that we partner with, we've had their leaders come in. So we sort of definitely feel like we're getting this real perspective of what's happening in the world and internally. So I think having that internal, external view gives people comfort that they're kind of understanding everything that's happening.
Thank you. Rebecca, I'm curious with your coaching of leaders. So you mentioned earlier, the difference of opinion versus emotions and the high stakes. Is there a particular area there where your coaching's had to change and to support the way they're leading during this time?
Yeah, look, a lot of my coaching focuses on emotion and emotional literacy anyway, but that has stepped it up a notch. Like it's almost back to what Nathan was saying around everyone has a different, everyone who's working from home has a different circumstance. And some people have got kids who they have to now be homeschooling. Some have got, they're living on their own. Some are in different countries that have got different restrictions. And underpinning all of our behaviour is how we feel about things. So this has been the most interesting experiment from a connection between emotion and behaviour. Because if you think back to how you were feeling, 10 or 11 weeks ago when the pandemic started, where that anxiety was rampant from going to the shops, from talking to your family, that had a direct impact onto most of our behaviours. So productivity went down. And if we as leaders can't make the connection between that emotion and behavior, then there's a whole missed opportunity. So a lot of my coaching has been around helping leaders understand that it's not people just being lazy because they're working from home. It's actually directly correlated to their emotions and their circumstance.
I just wanted to open up, I guess, the next question to anyone on the panel. Feel free to jump in. Curious about if you've had your own kind of holy crap moment that's really, you've suddenly been landed in uncharted waters and you've had to navigate through it. You don't really need to go into the detail of the moment, but more about something you've felt and how you found yourself handling it.
I've got like 20 that just like pop into my head when you say that. I'm like, I can confess all of them, but no, let someone else go with that one. I've got lots.
Yeah, look, I'm sure we've all probably got heaps of them. Particularly with HR, it's the beauty of HR. You sort of you can't plan for every situation, every conversation. You only learn by doing. So, in terms of not getting into the specific situations, but how I've sort of reflected and best think handling, and it sort of touches on what I was saying before about if you are finding yourself in something new or uncharted waters, the best thing you can do is just listen. Ask your open questions. Make sure that you have a full picture of what's going on and letting them know you've heard them. But don't be afraid to then have to take some time to go away, consult, even take some time for you to reflect yourself on what you need to hear in that situation, because I think too often we want to fix things and we're already, if we go to that kind of shrewd listening type thing, you're already solving the problem in your head. But most of the time you probably missed what actually they're trying to tell you. So the best thing you can do is just let them tell you, sit on it, go away, and just be really clear about when you're going to come back to them and stick to that. There's nothing worse than leaving an open, unended time frame for when you're going to come back to someone. But rather than say something in the moment that, you might make the situation worse with your advice. You could possibly undermine your own credibility as a leader by having to come back and going, oh, sorry, that advice I gave you, I've actually gone away and I probably shouldn't have given that. You don't want to find yourself in those situations for yourself or the person. So I'm a big believer in just sit and reflect and come back to them.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And don't be afraid to step out of the conversation, like to pause it. I talk a lot about when you're in a tough conversation, there's two things kind of happening. There's the content of the conversation. So there's what you're talking about. And then there's the safety of the conversation. And so if safety goes, and you'll know when it's gone, like all of us have been in those, oh shit moments where you're like, that is not what I meant, or that's not how this was meant to go. You've almost got to step out of the content and reestablish safety before you head back into the content. So like Ellie's alluding to there, you can take a break and you can say, look, can we pause it for now and come back tomorrow when we've both calmed down a little bit? So I think stepping out of it rather than pushing through. I've pushed through one too many times in my career and wished I'd not done that.
Interestingly, I was going to say something similar, and that's about it being okay to say you don't know the answer to something.
Yeah, absolutely.
You feel like you need to be the expert, but in fact showing some humility and acknowledging that you don't have all the answers and that you're going to go away, it actually reassures people, because I think all of us feel like there's stuff we don't know. And we all probably know those people that look like they just have it all covered and know everything. And so it can be really reassuring to realise that other people don't know, and there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that you don't know or you want to check something. Because I think that is where you can often feel cornered into committing to things that you shouldn't be, or making things up as you go along. Interestingly, I remember before I had to do my first presentation to the board, I got this, it was like a checklist or like a tips of what to do and what not to do. And one of the things on what not to do was don't make it, like if they ask you a question and you don't know the answer, don't make it up. These are highly seasoned board members, they'll know. And all I could think of was what must have happened one day for them to have to put that in there. Like someone's obviously just totally made up and it's gone horribly wrong, and then they've added that into the list of what not to do. But you can see how that happens. And so yeah, I think that's the main thing of just acknowledging that it's okay to say you don't know.
I feel like that some of that also comes with maturity, because I think certainly we can probably all remember back to when you're more junior in an organisation and you're sitting around the table and you feel like you don't know as much as everyone else and you're trying to, fill in those gaps and make it seem like you do. What do you think, Fiona, when you think about, I'm feeling like, challenging conversations have played a part in your job for quite a long time. What do you think you do differently and you've learned along the way, and how you handle them, to say when you first had to deal with some tough things?
I think one thing that comes with life experience is empathy. That, and you can still, obviously you can still be very empathetic when you're young, but it's really hard to really stand in someone else's shoes if you haven't even been in your own shoes very long. So for me, I think that's the biggest thing that comes with experience and with age, is empathy. And when I look back on, some of my earlier times when I was first starting out, having different, telling someone that someone's made a sexual harassment claim and I'm here to investigate, or, the whole way I would approach that now is quite different, and not really understanding how threatening that is or how that might make someone feel. And the other thing that was a real shift for me in my career was having kids and having a family, and it not just sort of being me. Even when even from a personal perspective, as we've gone through different restructures, like, big organizations restructure all the time. I never felt as stressed as when we went through one once I'd had kids, and there was so much more riding on me having a job and having a family to provide for. And even though I might have intellectually understood that before having my own kids, emotionally understanding that, and I think it made me a much better leader, because I'd been a leader for a long time of people that did have kids and I didn't have kids. And I definitely think, especially when we went through a restructure last year, the way I supported my team, I feel like I did a much better job because I had more empathy.
Nathan, I'm curious, I guess, as someone who founded a business, and you've been, leading and running a business and building a business for a number of years, what do you think you've learnt and now do differently in some of these tough situations?
It's probably, in hindsight, it's one of those, the scenario planning that they all say that you should be doing. The what if scenarios. So what if your business revenue dropped by 40%? What if it increased by 40%? What if it was 80%? Like all those different scenarios, and playing that out with your leadership team. So because this is going to be over before we know it. So what I will take into the future is to be doing more of that scenario planning, so that if there'll be another crisis, it might not be a health crisis, it might be a financial crisis. But one of the things I really kicked myself was, we had a 3 or 4 years ago, we had a fire in our building, and building didn't burn down, thankfully, but we couldn't occupy the building for about 7 days. Now, us as technology company just picked our stuff up and went home, knowing that we could come back in once they had a generator and all that kind of stuff. But we really didn't play. That was a really good scenario we could have really played out, because we knew it was 5 or 7 days, whatever. But what happens if it was 5 or 7 weeks, like it's turning out to be? So yeah.
So Ellie, we often think about the downside and how tough it's been for leaders during the crisis. Have you seen any opportunity for the leaders in your business, that you've been supporting, opportunity for them in the current situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it sounds a bit simple, but it's an opportunity for them to show why they're leaders. I mean, people more than ever are looking to them for guidance, direction, advice. So I think it can be a little bit of a sink or swim moment for a lot of leaders, but there is definitely opportunity to learn from this. And we've talked a lot about admitting what you don't know and being adaptable. But I just think for organisations in general, the amount of organisational change that has happened because of this, you hear, for us, travel, for instance, everyone used to say travel, you have to travel, face-to-face meetings, couldn't possibly do that meeting without being there in person. And everyone's been forced to adapt, and it's created so much more opportunity in terms of having time back. It often brings up potential issues that we've neglected or we've deprioritized, and all of a sudden you're forced to confront them. So I do think being able to adapt to these changing circumstances has provided all these possibilities for improvements and innovation for many businesses who said they couldn't do things before. It's kind of taken that excuse out, so we're forced to be a bit more creative now.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, with us as an organisation, rapid deployment of tools that were considered slowly over time, and I think there was the term maybe 10 weeks ago that was changed due to crisis or adoption by crisis, because people were just going, Teams, sure, bring it, I'll learn it. Whereas a month before they would have been resistant. What do you think, Rebecca, with the coaching you're doing? Have you seen how people you're coaching have responded through opportunity and kind of shifted in how they work or how they lead?
Yeah, there's been a real not a forced into this, but a real stepping into their vulnerability and stepping into their authenticity out of just necessity. I think because everyone through this crisis has felt vulnerable and has felt, and in my work, we define vulnerability as risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. And I think everyone has kind of felt that. And those leaders that have stepped into that have really had a chance to kind of show their humanity. Like I talk about my work is, if I bring it down to its essence, it's I bring humanity into the workplace. And I think this has been an opportunity to do that from a leadership perspective. Some people have done it and some people haven't. And I think those leaders who have really gone up in their employees' estimations. I've seen it in a number of large companies, like you were saying, Fiona, at ANZ, and I've seen, my husband works for Telstra, and the leadership has been outstanding because they haven't tried to have all the answers, and they've showed their vulnerability.
What do you think of those consistent traits across a broad range of organisations where people have speak, I guess, positively about their leaders during this crisis? What do you think are the traits that are consistent that we look for or we see when we think of a great leader during a crisis?
I go for authenticity. Like that's the one, people have good bullshit detectors. They really do. And I think that's the one thing that I look for and I've always looked for. And I think that's from my perspective. Yeah. I'd love to hear, what do you guys think?
I agree. And I think even if you read, I'm a massive Jacinda Ardern fan, and just even reading why everyone's saying she's been so successful as a leader, it comes down to all the things I was saying about why I think our CEO is really great, that, great communication, authenticity, clarity of message. Can I just go on the previous question? One of the things that I think has been really interesting from my perspective is the impact that this way of working has had on inclusion. So I'm fortunate that I work in a team of 10, where 8 of us are based in Melbourne, 1 in Adelaide and 1 in Wellington. And of the 8 of us in Melbourne, all of us a number of us work part-time, and all of us work from home at least 1 day a week, and so all different days. So we're a team that we are never all physically in the same place. And so we already were very inclusive of people's personal situations, and we were already very good at connecting virtually. So we're like a really well-connected team. And I think this has really highlighted and really stretched some people that need that physical connection. And so those teams that are used to all being together, I think that's really tested them. So we've been sharing a lot of what we did, when we were first connecting as a team, and the different ways that we are staying connected. And so I think that looking forward to the future, and I think some of the others mentioned this before, things that we're seeing, were said to be impossible a few weeks ago, or you can't possibly do that meeting virtually, or that job can't be done from home. What that's going to mean for the future workforce in terms of the inclusion of people with caring responsibilities, the inclusion of people with disabilities who might currently struggle to physically get into workplaces. We're going to see a massive shift. Unfortunately, there will be some pockets that think that this experience of flexible working, because this isn't ideal flexible working, like this is forced working from home. People have been juggling kids, which they wouldn't normally. So for me, like a big thing that I really want to focus on going forward is those people that have had, those line managers that have had a bad experience with their people working from home, of not letting that tarnish their view of it, because I think there's a real opportunity for inclusion.
Can I just add to that as well? I've seen a massive acceptance as well. So, and what I meant by that is acceptance of the 4-year-old coming along, behind you and grabbing something off your desk, or I've got a printer behind me. So my kids have been coming in, like when they were working from home, when school wasn't was homeschooling, they're coming in to grab paper, and it's just previously that would have just sent me insane. It's like, this is my space, whereas it's like it's so cool. Actually, yeah, it is. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah. It's even funny, I think.
Kids and pets and I think that's really helped build the connection as well.
The humanity, right? Like, it's seeing people in their entirety. Like, often we separate work and life, and it's been this forced like meshing of the two, and we're like, he has kids, he has a dog, like, we have lives, oh my god, we're humans, that happened to work, how amazing.
Yeah, they've got terrible casual dress sense.
Definitely saw the decline in appearance over time. People started strong and then just gave up a couple of weeks in.
I know, didn't they see like an increase in I think it started with, they were like trending on what people were buying online, and it started with like games to entertain us, like jigsaws, and then it went to like tracksuit pants. Like a surge of like tracksuit pants. Like, of course there was.
I did comment to my husband, I think yesterday, that as we transition back into the office, maybe one way to do it is to allow track pants and Ugg boots to be in the office for a while. Might help us feel more comfortable. One of the other questions we had was actually, tell us about a great leader that you've had and what made them great. But what I thought we could do is have a think about that one, panel, if there is something that comes to mind. But while you have a think, I thought Rebecca Jackson, you've been monitoring the chat. Are there any questions in the chat that we want to throw to the panel at this stage?
Absolutely. We do have some questions in the chat, which is nice. And I hope everyone's been enjoying my reaction shots as we've been going along. So we have, and my screen's just dropped out for me, which is lovely while we're having questions come through. There was a question from John. Seamless transition here. Come back screen. There we are. John Zhang. Hi, John. He's been with us throughout the conference. How about cultural diversity? How do you deal with cultural differences?
Yeah, so one thing that's been really interesting as we've worked through the approach that we're taking to the situation at ANZ is we obviously have a really broad footprint. And so one of the things that we always need to do is just make sure that we're not taking an Australian-centric approach to things. So I think that then really helps us better understand the diversity in the one geography as well. So, if you think about all the people we were sending home, we have people in some countries that, they live in villages that don't even have internet. There are so many different issues that we need to take into account. So I think for us, that understanding our people and listening and communicating. So we've had a lot of engagement. We've used Yammer a lot through this to better understand what our individual people need. So we have, everyone's got a different cultural background, a different family background, different levels of resilience of how they cope with different situations. So I think regardless of what the point of difference or the type of diversity you're dealing with, the principles are really the same of making sure that you're not just coming from your point of view. We've got really strong employee networks or affinity groups or employee resource groups. Different companies call them different things. And we have a cultural diversity network. So all our different employee networks have been critical for how we engage with our people. So they've all been represented in different working groups as we test what will or won't work, because I can't assume that I understand every single situation. I'm fortunate I don't have a disability. I'm not a member of the LGBTI community. There are so many different elements of our people that I don't represent. So it's important that we actually make sure they have a voice, and we really do that through our employee networks, and to try and do the best we can to make sure that we're being inclusive and that the approaches that we're taking are inclusive.
Yeah, and that kind of links it back to the tough conversation piece, because then you've got to talk about privilege, and that there's the embedded privilege in our organisations. So yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah, John says, thank you very much for the answer. We've got from Philip or Philippe, how has productivity worked out with work from home? Are there certain industries that do better than others in your experience? I might throw to Ellie on that one, just because I know that we both work at NextDC, and our organisation is diverse in the workforce. So Ellie, what do you think about that in terms of data centres in an industry with working from home?
Yeah, look, I think one of the things we had to acknowledge straight away was that, of course, we're going to see a drop in productivity given the change in environment. You know, we've got some people adapted within the first week to working from home. Others took a lot longer, and it was about being mindful. And there are a lot of conversations about, well, it's great for me. How can it not be for you? And I think it's that unchosen change. It's when you've worked at home in the past, it's been your decision, and it either works for you, or you've got a specific project or tasks that you're going to smash out that day, so you do it for that day in the week. Whereas all of a sudden we had about 60% of our workforce who aren't critical to the operation of our data centres at home in this sort of brand new forced environment. And we definitely saw a varying degree of people who thrived and people that didn't. And the key thing we tried to do was actually just get people to be honest about that and put their hand up if they were struggling. And something, if we come back to sort of the leadership focus of this session, was the best feedback we got, or the most engagement we got, was when leaders were admitting that they were also struggling, whether it was, you know, the kids under the desk, the dog in the background, you know, caring responsibilities, whatever it might have been. The minute they actually admitted, yeah, you know what, I'm not having a great day today. Today's been a particularly hard day and I haven't been that productive. It allowed people to be really open about that. And we slowly started to actually see people get more comfortable about that. And like anything, over time, we'll continue to see that uplift. But I'm sure there are definitely industries that are doing better than others at the moment. But I think we all echo the sentiment that there will be plenty of industries who said working from home was impossible. And that argument has absolutely been taken away now. So it'll be interesting to see what people do moving forward and how they allow that remote working and that working from home back into their culture moving forward.
Yeah, and
Megan, we've got one more question in the chat. I don't know if we want to throw to that. I'm just keeping my eye on the time as I do. Cairo says, Nathan raised this, but happy for anyone to take the question. How will you decide which scenarios to model? How will you choose them? So maybe Nathan, given you were talking about scenarios, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so the specific scenarios I'm currently modeling, actually. So because why do I need to wait, basically, is what I'm challenging, is you know, I should be doing it now. So specific scenarios is that rapid revenue decline, or cyber incident as well. And how do we react to that? It was really interesting because my business partner decided to run a phishing test on all our staff today just before this kicked off. So I'm getting pinged left, right, and centre. Is this legit? Is this legit? Because the email came from me to update their payroll details. So it's I didn't think about the timing on that one, but they're the key scenarios. So but as I alluded to before, it's the other side as well. So what if revenue went up by 40% or 400%? So what would that look like?
Megan, I might throw back to you now, given we're super close to time.
Anyone in the panel, do you have any thoughts on that final question of a great leader and what made them great throughout your career? Any thoughts?
Openness for me. One of my greatest leaders I ever had told me things that she was told she wasn't allowed to tell us, and trusted us that it would stay within the group because it would help us do our jobs better. So being as open as you can with your employees, obviously with boundaries, but yeah, openness for me and authenticity.
Yeah, for me it's empathy, communication, and I also had trust and honesty as well.
Yeah.
Mm.
I had the just the pushing you. So it's like like your personal trainer. They always get that extra 20% out of you that you never thought you could get.
Mm.
That's been the key with me.
And I think with that sort of that pushing you and that trust comes with creating a safe space for you to give things a go and to potentially fail. But I think, you know, learning from your mistakes and giving the opportunity to see that and make that decision is a huge thing. But, not all leaders, I think, get that right. So I think that's really important.
Do you guys have any final thoughts before we finish up? Have there been any things that we sort of almost touch on that you wanted to dive deeper into, or any things you want to ask each other?
I had one thing which I meant to say at the beginning, because it was so great to have the acknowledgement of country at the beginning of the session, but especially given it's National Reconciliation Week, I just wanted to give a quick plug. ANZ's made freely available our Indigenous Cultural Learning module online. So if I could just give you the address, it's Indigenous Cultural Awareness, all one word, .anz.com. It doesn't take long to do it. I really encourage you to do it. You know, it's something you can do with your kids as well, and just to learn a little bit more about Indigenous culture and history.
Amazing.
I'm just looking for that link and I'll drop it in the chat for everyone.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you.
Doing it right now. Me and Google.
No further comments from me. It's just been really nice to kind of have this conversation. I've learned a lot as well, so it's been great.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Thank you.
I'll third that.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. It's been excellent.
Thanks to all of you for taking the opportunity, and thanks for getting involved. And particularly, this was a really great way to head towards the finish of our final day. We were really, really passionate through the planning of the conference to have human stories and have different content that wasn't just about, you know, technical features and all that sort of thing. And there's been some really great presentations along the way that, you know, are about connecting people and driving awareness, and even sessions like Cairo, who's in here, they did a 5-part series that was 15 minutes every Friday to help coach organisations. So it's just been really, really enjoyable for everyone, I think, and great for us as planners to have great people like yourselves get involved. So we really appreciate it. Thank you very much to everyone who is involved as well, who participated and dialed in. And we'll also release the video later on socials and LinkedIn and anywhere, so others can watch it if you want to suggest people dial in and things like that. So thank you very much, everyone. Before we go, is there anything else we need to do? Bex?
Yes, we probably need to show people the competition slide, which luckily I have one that I prepared earlier. So if you are on the call and you're keen to win some stuff, of which we have heaps from our lovely sponsors, you can scan the QR code, which is appearing up on your screen right now for competition week 5. You do need to be registered to the event to be eligible for the competition. So I'm just going to keep doing some filler with my voice while you take a moment to get that QR code, and thank Megan for being an amazing host, and to our panelists for joining us. I've enjoyed it. It's been sucky for me because I've been very conscious that my face is visible, so I can't take notes and things. So I'm going to come back and watch it again. So hopefully you've all had a chance to get the QR code, and I'm going to press stop on the recording now.